your patience for some of the technical issues we've been having this evening. I'd like to talk to you today about how we use photography. As a photographer, for me specifically, taking the photograph is just the beginning of a process. It's the beginning of a process of using the photograph to the full extent that you can make that image as effective as you possibly can. And so I want to take you through two stories that I've been working on in Central Africa over the last 20 years to highlight how, as a photographer, I use the image and use photographs to engage policymakers, governments, multinational corporations to change the way they behave and to change laws that are in some way creating injustices for the people in the countries that I work in. And the first country that I want to cover was a country that I've spent a lot of time in. I think the first time I traveled there was in 1998. And that country is the Democratic Republic of Congo. Can we just take the lights down? Is that okay? All the way down? All the lights? Thank you. The Democratic Republic of Congo is... Can I just ask that projector isn't sharp? Is there a way of making that image sharp? Technical people? I'll carry on, maybe they can fix it in the background. In the Democratic Republic of Congo since 1998, there has been a conflict going on over the access to natural resources. Those natural resources have been gold, tin, tantalum, and tungsten. And that conflict has been raging, and the mining of those minerals by rebel forces have been financing the conflict and enabling them to buy weapons to further the conflict and take over more of the mining areas. These images are taken in an area of the Democratic Republic of Congo called Ituri. And there was a war going on there between 2003 and 2005 over the access to gold in this region. This is a buyer of minerals, and he's also a pastor, and he tries to persuade his congregation in the church to sell them cheaper minerals to save their soul, or so he preaches to them. Of course, that's not the case at all. This young boy I met as I was coming back from a town that was being attacked called Fataki. And Fataki was a major area of gold production. And this young boy I saw because his... Are we okay, technically, here? This young boy I saw as he was trying to fix his bike on the road. His bike, I was driving down the road and his bike was turned upside down, and the chain had come off the bicycle. And so I stopped to see if I could help him or if he needed a lift somewhere. And I didn't really notice that he was a child soldier at that time. I just thought he was a young boy. When I started to help him fix the bike, I then saw the Kalashnikov that he was carrying. And he didn't want any help, but he just got his bike when he'd fixed it and started to ride off. And as you see, he's too small even to ride the bike. His feet barely touch the pedals. And this for me is a symbolic image in that it really shows you what war does to children and how childhood is stolen from the youth within the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. And at any one time in DRC, there are up to 30,000 children fighting in different rebel groups as child soldiers. These are rebels that are guarding the mines, the gold mines, outside a town called Watsa. And these are rebel soldiers that have just been taken into the government forces. They've been demobilized as rebels and they've been taken into the government forces. This young boy I met in a town called Kanyabayonga, and I'm not sure if any of you were here to watch the films that were awarded a couple of nights ago here, but the film on Congo, where we saw some young men trying to demobilize from the FDLR, that's the same town this image was taken in. And I spent many months in that area documenting the war between 2008 and 2012. But this young boy is about 11 years old, and he volunteered to fight against a rebel group called the CNDP, which was a Rwandan-financed Tutsi rebel group with its kind of connotations and political references embedded in the genocide in Rwanda in 1994. And many of the Tutsi rebel groups that are fighting in the eastern part of Congo are there, financed by Rwanda to try to bring to justice the Hutu rebels, the FDLR, the people you saw in the film the other day, actually, to bring them to justice for the genocide that they caused in 1994 in Rwanda. But this young boy, he is a member of a rebel group called the Mai Mai. And in Swahili, Mai means water. And they believe that the bullets will, when they're shot, the bullets will drop off them like water, which is why they call themselves the Mai Mai. And that's why he's wearing this garland on his head, and he has these leaves wrapped around his arms and his legs as well, and he believes that this will protect him. Of course, that's not true, it doesn't. These are young women fleeing the fighting with the small pieces of kitchenware and food that they can carry, the small amount that they can get within the minutes that they have whilst their village is being attacked. This image is taken in a town called Getty, and it's a displaced camp. These people have just arrived a few days before. Thousands of people have arrived from the towns around this area, and they've been running from the fighting around the gold mines. And this is a young pastor in the camp, and he's preaching to his the people, the displaced people there. This is displaced people fleeing the conflict from the town that I mentioned earlier on, Fataki, taken through the window of my car that I was driving on that day. And these are women who are collecting water late in the evening in a displaced camp in a town called Goma. And many hundreds of thousands of displaced have fled to Goma, and they have built huge displaced camps in this area, and that causes a big problem with cholera in the rainy season, and many hundreds of people die every year from cholera because there is no way to get rid of the feces and the human waste in this region. And so when the rains come, that mixes together with the human feces, and that ends up in the drinking water, and of course people get very sick. This is what the displaced camps look like. The homes that they build are just made out of small pieces of wood and grass. This is the UN, and the UN have been in country since the late 90s, but still have proved pretty ineffective in terms of controlling the conflict and making the mines and the areas around the mines safe. This is a young boy who lives on the street in the eastern part of Kinshasa, which is the capital of the Democratic Republic of Congo. And he's getting his first shower for several months, actually, in this children's drop-in center that hopes to educate and feed and accommodate street children, but not many of them really want to stay there. This young boy is in a displaced camp. He's just arrived, and his father has built this shelter for him. You can see how they create the structures using the twigs, the wood around. And he's waiting for a plastic sheeting from the UN so that he can lay that over the twigs you see there and create a home for them. This is what Congo should look like. This is the River Congo, very close to its source in the province of Katanga. And they're fishing here in a traditional way, using boats cut out of trees. And given the chance for peace, this is what Congo should and could look like. But this is very rare. I've been documenting the impact of this conflict on the population, and one of the worst weapons of war that can be used in conflict is sexual violence. And in Eastern Congo, in 2011, the survey came out that 45% of women in Eastern Congo will have experienced some form of sexual violence during their life. And there are between 30 and 40,000 rape cases, reported rape cases every year in Eastern DRC. And all of these rapes are mostly carried out by the different military groups, including the government, that are stationed in this area. Because there is complete impunity for the attack, very few people, very few soldiers are held accountable for their actions. And this is a woman in one of the centers set up to house and take care of women after they've been a victim of sexual violence. This is an image in front of a rebel-held center. The rebel leader was called Unkunda, and he was basically leading one of the main Tutsi rebel forces in the region. And this is the impact that conflict has. This young woman was trying to protect her children when they were attacked by Hutus in the northern part of the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, and you can see the impact that that's had not just on her, but on her children. The death toll in the Democratic Republic of Congo has been devastating, and since 1998, over 5.4 million people have died as a result of this conflict. And I live in Norway, and that's the total population of my country killed in 10 years. So you can see the devastating impact that this has on the population. And of course, the people that are the most vulnerable are children. And of those 5.4 million people that have died in this time, the majority of them haven't died from the bullet or the gun. They've died because of the lack of access to medication caused by the overall insecurity in the area, caused by the need for the military groups to get access to natural resources. And ironically, it's the towns that are very rich in minerals, that are very rich in natural resources, that become the worst hit, that become the most impoverished, and that become really these enclaves where the civilians are trapped and can't leave, and their children die from the most basic of illnesses. These two brothers I met very early one morning, and they were coming back from the marketplace where they had been to buy a coffin, and I asked if I could follow them home. And it turned out that they were going to a village that I knew very well, and to a family that I'd spent a lot of time with. And they were going to the home of this young girl called Sakuralisi. She was 6 months old when she died of malaria, a very treatable disease if you have the pills that can medicate. But unfortunately, the family simply couldn't leave the area that they were living in because of the violence that was going on in the bush, in the areas around the mines. And so this is the moment where the mother is bathing Sakuralisi just before she puts her in her coffin. And for the final moments before saying goodbye. And for me, this life, Sakuralisi's life, is as really a representation of all of these 5.4 million people that have died. Over 1,250 people die every day in Eastern Congo. 1,250 people. And for me, Sakuralisi is a representation of those statistics. We can talk at numbers, we can talk 5.4 million people, we can talk 30% of this or 45% of that, but this is the human face of that tragedy and the human cost of the access to these minerals that we are all consuming. So, what can we do about it? What are these minerals, first of all? They're minerals that we all use. They're minerals that we all have in this room. We use them in our smartphones, we use them in our computers, we use them in our cameras, we use them in our cars. And those minerals are tin, tantalum, tungsten, and gold. And they come in vast quantities in Eastern Congo, and they're exploited and extracted in that region. And so in 2010, the American government, after almost 12 years of advocacy from me and groups like the Enough Project, which publishes this website, they introduced a law called the Dodd-Frank Act, which made every American manufacturing company, electronics manufacturing company that's listed on the American Stock Exchange, responsible for making a statement about where they get their conflict minerals. And so there was a survey done about which companies were most active in trying to eradicate conflict minerals from their products. And if we see here, right at the top of that list is Intel. They're the ones that are the most proactive, are the fastest in terms of trying to source and finance conflict-free mines in Eastern Congo so that they can take those minerals and guarantee that no child soldiers are working in that area, or no children are working in the mine, and no mothers are working in the mine. So as I'm sure there are a lot of photographers in this room, we can see way down at the bottom of that list, Canon, Nikon, Sony. When it's in the red, those are the companies that are making the least progress in terms of trying to make their product conflict mineral free. If we look at this slight change, we can see that from 2010 to 2012, the progress that's being made. So the lighter green area, we can see that's where these companies were in 2010. And this is where the darker green area is where they'd moved 2 years later. And in 2012, there are about 200 factories that process these minerals around the world, only 200. And in 2012, we could only say that 20% of those factories were considered conflict mineral free. And now, in 2015, we can say that 60% are conflict mineral free, a huge step forward, but definitely not where we want to be. We would like it to be 100% of products that are conflict mineral free. So if you want to learn more, I'm sure you're very curious. There's a lot of students here, a lot of probably very socially aware and socially concerned individuals, especially when we are at a week at FINI that is focusing on social justice. And we can't forget our own responsibility in that concept of social justice, that we as consumers have a responsibility to push manufacturers to make sure that the products that they're creating, the products that we buy and the products that we use are conflict mineral free. That's your responsibility. We can't wash our hands here. We have to take that responsibility. Social justice doesn't just sit with the lawmakers. Social justice doesn't just sit with the government. It also sits with the population. And this is where it starts for you as consumers to demand from the manufacturers that create the products that you use that they become conflict mineral free. And you can start here by going to learn about which products have conflict minerals in them and what they are. So we see here that tantalum is used to help charge your battery. Tin and tantalum is the product that we use in our cameras. Tin and tantalum is also what we use when we're texting, sending SMS and emailing. When we're going into our contact section of our phones and our computers, we use gold. That helps processing the way that we go into contacts and search through facts within our phones. And the vibration that you have on your phones uses tungsten. All of those products are being mined in Eastern Congo, and all of those products are being used to finance conflict. So it's up to you, the consumer, to educate yourself, to work out how best we can put pressure on the organizations that are making these products. And with the hope that we can change the next 10 years so that we won't be standing here saying another 5.4 million people have died in 2025. This is the trading route for the natural resources. They come from DR Congo and they go through Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, Kenya, Tanzania, and they're shipped to mostly the Far East, where all of the product smelters are based in Malaysia, Thailand, India, China. And they're processed into the minerals that we then can use in our electronic products. They are put into electronic products, and then those electronic products are shipped all around the world and we buy them. And this is the direct link you can see here from Congo to Asia into your pocket. And this shows quite evidently the responsibilities that we all have here. So I urge you to try to go, and if you want to learn more, if you want to send messages to the organizations that are responsible for manufacturing these products, then you can go to the Enough Project website, the website that we saw back here, Raise Hope for Congo. And you can go and follow the link at the top that says Take Action. And you can send emails, you can send messages, you can go and engage with the people that manufacture these products to tell them that you want them to engage and be more proactive in the way that they engage with conflict minerals. I want to move on from Congo, which I've been working in since 1998, and the country that actually I traveled to before I went to Congo in 1997. It was the country that I was in when I really got the idea to go to Congo to do the documentaries that then took 15 years of my life. And that was Central African Republic. And Central African Republic for the last 2 years have been going through incredible turmoil as a result of the corruption, the bad governments, the lack of democracy, and desperate poverty that we see in the country. And I've been documenting that for an organization called Human Rights Watch, which is an advocacy group. And it's a group that, as a photographer, I engage with incredibly. And just as I have been very active in trying to engage policymakers and governments and multinational corporations in the Democratic Republic of Congo with regard to conflict minerals, I've also been very focused on trying to engage governments in responding to the conflict that we see in the Central African Republic. I traveled there first in the middle of 2013 on this particular trip. And I found a population terrified, a population that had fled their homes. Millions of people had fled their homes, and they were living in the bush, in the jungle, trying to avoid the rebel groups that had come from the north of the country, that had come from Chad, to try to overthrow the very corrupt Bouzizi government that was in place in 2013. This young lady I met, Khadija is her name, and she is a pearl herder. She is one of the indigenous nomads from the Central African region. They're not really, they don't really have a nationality as such. They travel through Chad, Central African Republic, and Cameroon with their cattle, and they move and follow the rains so that their cattle can graze and have enough to eat. And this group was targeted by a group called the Anti-Balaka, who were a largely animist and Christian rebel group who targeted the Muslim pearl herders and the Muslim citizens of the Central African Republic. And she was the only survivor of an attack on her village that killed her husband, her children, her mother, her father, and 50 other members of their village, where they were based during their movement of shifting their cattle. She herself was shot in the back of the head and was found several days later amongst the bodies in the village, barely alive. And this is her just as she's recovering in the local imam's house where she was taken after they found her. This young woman lost her husband and her 2 elder sons. They were shot in front of her. And the only way that she managed to get out of that situation with her only son here was because she dressed him up as a girl. And the Anti-Balaka group that was targeting this particular village was focusing on killing the male population. And she dressed her young boy up as a girl and managed to escape with him. This is a displaced camp in a church in a town called Bosangoa, where 30,000 people are being sheltered by the local priest to try to avoid the attacks from the Seleka that have come from the north, the Seleka rebels. And what changed really with this conflict? I was covering Central African Republic, and I was there pretty much for 2 years, off and on. I was going in every month, every other month. And I didn't count any more than 5 journalists at any one time covering this conflict. It was a conflict where hundreds of thousands of people were being displaced and tens of thousands of people were being killed, and very few people, journalists, were covering this conflict. I was there with Human Rights Watch, and we were desperate to try to get the attention of the international community, to try to get the attention of specifically the French government, because they were the only ones that had the potential to try to intervene in this conflict and come in with troops to keep the peace. And so this is we used social media a lot because journalism simply wasn't working. And this is kind of where we now have a direct link between photographers, me, advocacy groups, and the very few journalists that are on the ground. And we use social media. We use Twitter, we used Instagram, we used Facebook, and we targeted very specifically the organizations and the policymakers and the international groups that could help. This is a displaced camp in Bossangoa, outside the church that we saw earlier on. Just as we saw in the Democratic Republic of Congo, the conflict uses an enormous amount of child soldiers. And these are people sheltering from an attack on their town. I was traveling in this town and driving through the main center of the town when the anti-Balaka forces started to attack. And thousands of people, including myself, ran into this African Union base to seek shelter. And there are about 4,500, 5,000 people in this area, just sheltering as the guns and the bullets and the bombs are dropping and being fired all around this compound that we're in, as the anti-Balaka moved into the town to try to attack the Muslim Seleka rebel movement. And that battle went on for about 4 days. The result of that, people were shot, people were killed. When the battle was over, we realized that it wasn't just happening in the town we were in, it was happening all around Central African Republic, in Bongi, in Bossangoa, in Boar, in all of the main centers of trade. And after the 4 days of fighting, over 10,000 people had been killed. These are people just bringing the small belongings, the small items of clothing and things to make themselves comfortable while they stay in this compound. And ironically, when the fighting subsided and I managed to get out of the compound and just across the road to a hospital that was being manned by the Doctors Without Borders, I went into this one room and found lots of wounded civilians, lots of wounded soldiers. And here we have a woman taking care of her child, the wife of one of the soldiers. He's lying to her left, the man in the red on the far side, and he's a fighter for the Christian anti-Balaka. And on the other side is a fighter for the Seleka. So these people, just hours before this photograph was taken, were in battle against each other. And here they are lying in a hospital being treated and are peaceful. And you try to wonder why there's so much hatred. Again, here we are using Twitter to try to engage the international community and to try to tell them what's been going on, again, only because there are simply no press in the country. There are no journalists where we were. A young boy who was fighting for the Seleka group here in Bossangoa. He's 14 years old. This is the weapon of choice for many in Central African Republic, the machete. Just as we saw the machete being used in Rwanda in 1994, we saw it being used here. And I kind of draw an analogy to Rwanda because I often think that what would have happened in Rwanda in 1994 if we'd have had social media. There were very few journalists covering the conflict in Rwanda too. And 800,000 people died in 90 days. Largely because the international community just looked the other way and let it happen and didn't quite realize how serious things were until it was too late. But within Central African Republic, we, because of social media, could make sure that people did see and did understand, and the message got out. So in a way, Human Rights Watch being there with Peter Buchart, who is one of the emergencies directors for HRW, just that presence alone, I think, was the tipping point for peacekeepers coming in a lot earlier, and it's restoring peace in areas where conflict was going on. And instead of there being 800,000 people dead, the number, whilst absolutely horrific in the tens of thousands, it didn't get any bigger than that, thankfully. But the conflict was desperately violent and desperately hateful. And I have to warn you, some of these images are a little bit difficult to look at. I'll try to warn you when one is coming up. And these are young animist or Christian people within a town or an area of Bangui. Bangui is the capital of Central African Republic. And this area is just on the outskirts called Piquet 13, Kilo 13. And this was a largely Muslim area. And these boys are looting all of the belongings from the homes of the Muslims as they have fled the area, because they were scared of the reprisal attacks that were building as a result of the destabilizing of the Seleka government. When the Seleka government came in 2013 and targeted the largely Christian population, most of those Christians left and fled to live in the bush. And they lived there for 9, 10, 11 months. And it was breeding resentment and breeding hate and breeding anger. And so when that Seleka government fell apart in January 2014, that led to this uprising from the Christian and animist groups against the largely innocent Muslim population. The fighters, the Seleka fighters that had created all of this instability and were largely responsible for most of the killing, had already left. So the people that had been killing had gone, and the Christian population focused on the Muslim population that was largely innocent. This is a woman praying in her home. She's Muslim, and there are 31 members of her family trapped in this compound. And there are about 200 anti-Balaka outside this compound who want to come in and kill them all. And the only reason they didn't was because Peter Buchard, myself, and 2 or 3 other journalists were creating a barrier between the anti-Balaka and the Muslim family. And it took us 8 hours to get the United Nations, to get the French soldiers actually at that time to come in and take these people out. They were refusing to take these people out, saying that it wasn't their job. They didn't want to get involved in being on one side or the other of a conflict or favoring one side or the other. And so they were going to let these people die. And the only reason they came actually to take them away is because the French Minister of Defense was coming the following day. And we tweeted to the French Minister of Defense, if you come tomorrow and there are 31 people dead in this compound, it's because your troops refused to listen. And then half an hour after we sent that tweet, the French troops came and took this family to safety. This is the population of Bangui, the center, the capital of Central African Republic. When they fled the fighting, they all came to the airport, and they were using the airport as a displaced camp. And at one stage, there were over 100,000 people living in the airport, living under the planes, living in the departure lounges, living in the airport, in the aircraft hangars. This is Peter Buchard from Human Rights Watch making a statement about how desperately uncovered this conflict is or was. This young boy is Youssoufa. We found him in a town called Yalouké. And as you see, he's desperately malnourished. He is, again, part of the group, the Pearl group, the same group that we saw, the very first woman that we saw in this slide show, a group of herders, but they have lost their cattle. The cattle have all been killed, and they're now living in a school, and they can't leave. They're being trapped there. It's being kind of trapped in an enclave, and very difficult for them to leave. And we notified the United Nations of the desperate health situation that was going on in this compound and how many people were already dying. And we told them about Youssoufa. And we did a story about Youssoufa. We sent images back to the US. We did an article about him. It was published in many newspapers. We tweeted about him. We used his image on Instagram to try to get people to come. No one came. And 2 weeks later, Youssoufa died from malnutrition. This is in a Muslim enclave where Muslims had fled for safety, and they were being picked off by the anti-Balaka, who were throwing grenades and shooting, sniping into this area. And this boy has just been killed in the marketplace as he went to try and get some breakfast for his family. This is a Christian boy who came actually to deliver food to the Muslims that were trapped in the enclave, and he was attacked, and they tried to lynch him, and they chased him through the town with bows and arrows and machete. The next image is going to be a little sensitive, so for those of you that are a little sensitive, maybe you can look away. A lot of the lynchings that went on, and there were hundreds and hundreds of lynchings where people were killed, decapitated, chopped up, burnt on fires all around Central African Republic. And most days I witnessed 5, 6, 10 lynchings. In Boar, on the 22nd of January, 100 Christians were killed by the Seleka, and there were no peacekeepers present. We went into that town just afterwards and saw the devastating situation. These are Christian civilians and animist civilians who are just attacking the Muslim quarter as the Muslims have fled, and they're burning homes, they're looting, destroying. They don't take over the areas that the Muslims lived in, they just completely destroy them. And this is the anti-Balaka saying that they don't want any more Muslims in Kar. It will only be from now on a Christian country. And in the months that followed these uprisings in January, over 750,000 Muslims fled Central African Republic, ethnically cleansed, and they now live in Chad and Cameroon. This is a young Christian boy running through the burning remains of a home that they'd burnt down, a Christian home, Muslim home, sorry. Colonel Dieudonné is an anti-Balaka leader telling Peter Bouckaert from Human Rights Watch that Muslims may have been born here, but they tried to kill our country and we don't want them here anymore. This was a coordinated movement to try to rid a country of an ethnic group, and the legal term for that is ethnic cleansing. This is a group of anti-Balaka. Actually, they are soldiers of Dieudonné who made the quote earlier on in a compound in Bangui. And for those photo geeks amongst you, this is my tribute to Diane Arbus. I'm sure you know the image that we see in Central Park in New York with a young boy with 2 grenades, toy grenades. These ones aren't toys. These are Christian population from the Kilo 6, just outside Bangui, who had been really held prisoners by the Seleka militia that were based in their town. And the tanks that you see there, the APCs that you see there, are French soldiers as they escort the Seleka, the Muslim Seleka rebel group, out of the area. And these people were screaming at this moment, liberté, liberté, freedom, freedom. And that cry soon turned to mosque, mosque. And they ran from celebrating the fact that the Seleka had left, and they went straight to the Muslim quarter and burned it, burning down the mosque and destroying everything. This is Etienne, and I met him on the side of a road about 300-400 kilometers outside of Bangui. And as the Muslim Seleka were fleeing Bangui, they kidnapped a lot of young boys to try to help them carry their belongings. And he was one of the people that were kidnapped. And we found him by the side of the road, desperately hungry and malnourished. He'd been forced to march through for nearly 2 weeks the bush with hardly any food, and he managed to escape. And I put him in the car and took him back 300-400 kilometers to his family. And this is the moment where his mother realizes for the first time that her son isn't dead. Until that point, the family had thought that he was killed by the Seleka. One of the few happy moments that I experienced on this trip. These are anti-Balaka going to attack a town of Muslims called Boda. There's some quite disturbing images coming up quite soon. This is a killing on the street, a lynching, and this is what was happening on a daily basis. There were 2 people lynched like this in this place. The French soldiers were very close. They did nothing. They let it happen. And again, horrific scenes of inhumanity as we see here. But the international community is still doing nothing. Another young boy killed on the streets. And these are Chad special forces. This soldier actually is in the country illegally. And Chad was largely responsible for financing the Muslim uprising in the beginning, and now responsible for trying to escort quite a lot of the Muslim civilians out of the country. And this convoy alone took 70,000 Muslims to Chad. And I stood there for hours and hours and hours as these trucks rolled out of Bangui. This is a young father, a Muslim father, with his newborn child, just before boarding the trucks to leave Bangui for the last time. And when, as a photographer, I think even in the most desperate of situations, and even in the most disturbing of times, it's really important as a photographer to focus on the small moments of dignity. We can't, as photographers, take away humanity and take away the soul of a nation. Yes, of course, we have to document reality, and if there is killing going on, we have to document that. But that's not going on all the time, and we have to also focus on the fact that there is love, and there is extraordinary amount of self-resilience and dignity. And as a photographer, I try to focus on that a lot, especially in situations like this. But then we get back to the crazy killing. And this is another lynching on the streets. This fire is there to burn a body. You see the leg underneath the fire. And that morning, I witnessed 7 people just being killed around me. Bodies were falling in response to a young girl who had been killed whilst she was going to church. They discovered her body, and the Christian family went out to kill Muslims as a result of that young Christian girl being killed. This body is a Muslim trader who was hacked to death by the boys, as you see, running away after they'd killed him. And they were just going around killing lots of Muslims. As a result of this, the few Muslims that were left came in and tried to kill several Christians, which they succeeded. And this tit-for-tat killing went on all morning, and we were around this place the whole time and witnessed all of it. And this is the sister of Vanessa lying dead on the floor, dressed in green. She's dressed in green because she was a singer in the choir in the church, and the singers in the choir wore green. And she was on her way to church this Sunday morning when she was killed. This is her sister mourning her death. And it was Vanessa's killing this morning that led to this continuous reprisals and killing. Some conflicts and sometimes photography really can be powerful. And I think with the work that we've done in Congo, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, focusing on conflict minerals, the photography that we've created there has been incredibly effective, targeting it at policymakers, targeting multinational corporations to really change laws, to change the way multinational corporations work and act, and to change the way governments hold them responsible. And to an extent, I think we did the same with Central African Republic. I think that if Peter, who is head of the Emergencies Division in Human Rights Watch, and other NGOs hadn't been there, hadn't been present, making it making the international community very aware of what's going on, then the French soldiers would not have arrived on the 9th of December 2013. And they arrived and saved thousands and thousands of lives. And I often wonder, if we didn't have social media, would we be looking at another Rwanda in Central African Republic? I think we would have done. And I think because of social media and because of this engagement, not because of journalism, journalism was almost non-existent at this time, but because of smart, thoughtful advocacy, photography combined with great advocacy really made a huge difference in Central African Republic. Now, Central African Republic is still one of the most desperate failed states that we have in our world today, and they need a lot of help, international help, to try to rebuild the trust and the peace going forward. But at least the killing is no longer happening. And largely the killing is no longer happening because the country has no more Muslims left in it. Most of the Muslims have been ethnically cleansed if they haven't been killed. So that's the end of the presentation. If there are any questions, I'll be very happy to answer any of them. Do you want to turn the lights on in the auditorium? Maybe help? Thank you. Are there any questions? Yeah, I think there may be some people walking around with a microphone, but there's a lady in green at the back. Does someone have a microphone to give to this lady? Or maybe she can shout out. Oh yeah, someone's coming, I think.
Marcos, good evening. My name is Gilberto, and I want to ask you 2 questions about your presentation. In the first place, I'm very impressed for the quality of your work, for your amazing slides that you are showing us. Me here, it's me.
Where are you? Oh yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
And I have 2 questions, Marcos. The first one is, what are you thinking when you take the photograph? What is the message that you are going to transmit us? When you consider that it's the precise instant to trigger your camera and to obtain that image, what are you trying to show us? What's your message? That's the first. And the second, please let us know about your personal life. Where do you live? In Congo? In the United Kingdom? Do you trip daily? What about your family? Do you have a wife? Do you have kids? When you devote your time to these photographs? And that's all for this moment.
So to answer the question, what is the message? I think it depends on the situation that I'm in. But when I go to an area, I'm not the sort of photographer that follows the news around the world. You know, I don't kind of rush off to Libya or Gaza, or I never cover conflicts that are already in the international focus and attention. I look most of the time at conflicts that are largely uncovered. And so my message normally is, on a global scale, listen, people, you have to see what is going on here. You have to understand what is going on here. And I'm trying to focus on that very specific group or government or multinational organization to try to change what is going on. And so I don't really think of individual photographs so much, but the overall narrative. When I'm creating it, I'm thinking of who is my audience. And for a time in Congo, for example, my audience was the American government and the European Union, policymakers, people that could put in place laws that would make manufacturing companies, electronics companies, legally bound to make a statement about where they get their natural resources. And so I was focusing specifically on trying to achieve that. In the same way that Stephanie focuses on governments to try to change laws that focus on child marriage and making it illegal for young people to be forced into a marriage. And in Central African Republic, my message was, it changed through time, actually. So when I first went there, my message was to try to show the horrific crisis that was unfolding in the country, but I was also trying to engage the French government, because they were the only ones with the resources and the only ones with the political capacity to do anything in the country. And so most of our work in the very first months was targeted very specifically at getting French troops into the country to bring peace. And it took 2 months, but they came on the 9th of December 2013. And I think that stopped large amounts of killing. So I hope that answers your question a little bit. As I'm photographing, I'm trying to look for photographs and moments that can express those situations, that can be the most powerful, that can convey the truth that's happening on the ground, the emotion that's happening on the ground. But also I'm looking for, as I said earlier on, those moments of dignity, those moments of humanity that can convey that, this isn't all horrific, but there are moments of humanity there. And I search them out. I really try to search them out. For your second question, I live in Norway, in a town called Oslo, by the sea, in a very beautiful part of the world, to try to maybe cleanse my mind of the things that we see when we're covering these issues. And I live there with my wife, and we have a very fantastic life, I think. I travel about half the year, 6 months a year, although this year maybe a little bit more than that. So my wife is very understanding sometimes. But we try to balance our life out as much as we can with time together, and we don't have kids, so it's a little easier maybe. But the second half of that second question was just like, when you take images like this, how does that permeate your life? You have to live with it, but it's difficult. You can't be in places like this and not be in some way touched and affected quite deeply by This young boy I met as I was coming back from a town that was being attacked called Fataki. And Fataki was a major area of gold production. And this young boy I saw because his... Are we okay, technically, here? This young boy I saw as he was trying to fix his bike on the road. His bike, I was driving down the road and his bike was turned upside down and the chain had come off the bicycle. And so I stopped to see if I could help him or if he needed a lift somewhere. And I didn't really notice that he was a child soldier at that time. I just thought he was a young boy. When I started to help him fix the bike, I then saw the Kalashnikov that he was carrying. And he didn't want any help, but he just got his bike when he'd fixed it and started to ride off. And as you see, he's too small even to ride the bike. His feet barely touch the pedals. And this for me is a symbolic image in that it really shows you what war does to children and how childhood is stolen from the youth within the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. And at any one time in DRC, there are up to 30,000 children fighting in different rebel groups as child soldiers. These are rebels that are guarding the mines, the gold mines, outside a town called Watsa. And can I just ask, that projector isn't sharp. Is there a way of making that image sharp? Technical people? I'll carry on, maybe they can fix it in the background. In the Democratic Republic of Congo since 1998, there has been a conflict going on over the access to natural resources. Those natural resources have been gold, tin, tantalum, and tungsten. And that conflict has been raging, and the mining of those minerals by rebel forces have been financing the conflict and enabling them to buy weapons to further the conflict and take over more of the mining areas. These images are taken in an area of the Democratic Republic of Congo called Ituri. And there was a war going on there between 2003 and 2005 over the access to gold in this region. This is a buyer of minerals, and he's also a pastor, and he tries to persuade his congregation in the church to sell them cheaper minerals to save their soul, or so he preaches to them. Of course, that's not the case at all. These are rebel soldiers that have just been taken into the government forces. They've been demobilized as rebels and they've been taken into the government forces. This young boy I met in a town called Kanyabayonga, and I'm not sure if any of you were here to watch the films that were awarded a couple of nights ago here, but the film on Congo, where we saw some young men trying to demobilize from the FDLR. That's the same town this image was taken in. And I spent many months in that area documenting the war between 2008 and 2012. But this young boy is about 11 years old, and he volunteered to fight against a rebel group called the CNDP, which was a Rwandan-financed Tutsi rebel group with its kind of connotations and political references embedded in the genocide in Rwanda in 1994. And many of the Tutsi rebel groups that are fighting in the eastern part of Congo are there, financed by Rwanda to try to bring to justice the Hutu rebels, the FDLR, the people you saw in the film the other day, actually, to bring them to justice for the genocide that they caused in 1994 in Rwanda. But this young boy, he is a member of a rebel group called the Mai Mai. And in Swahili, Mai means water. And they believe that the bullets, patience for some of the technical issues we've been having this evening. I'd like to talk to you today about how we use photography. As a photographer, for me specifically, taking the photograph is just the beginning of a process. It's the beginning of a process of using the photograph to the full extent that you can make that image as effective as you possibly can. And so I want to take you through two stories that I've been working on in Central Africa over the last 20 years to highlight how, as a photographer, I use the image and use photographs to engage policymakers, governments, multinational corporations to change the way they behave and to change laws that are in some way creating injustices for the people in the countries that I work in. And the first country that I want to cover was a country that I've spent a lot of time in. I think the first time I traveled there was in 1998. And that country is the Democratic Republic of Congo. Can we just take the lights down? Is that okay? All the way down? All the lights? Thank you. The Democratic Republic of Congo is when they're shot, the bullets will drop off them like water, which is why they call themselves the Mai Mai, and that's why he's wearing this garland on his head, and he has these leaves wrapped around his arms and his legs as well, and he believes that this will protect him. Of course, that's not true. It doesn't. These are young women fleeing the fighting with the small pieces of kitchenware and food that they can carry, the small amount that they can get within the minutes that they have whilst their village is being attacked. This image is taken in a town called Getty, and it's a displaced camp. These people have just arrived a few days before. Thousands of people have arrived from the towns around this area, and they've been running from the fighting around the gold mines. And this is a young pastor in the camp, and he's preaching to the people, the displaced people there. This is displaced people fleeing the conflict from the town that I mentioned earlier on, Fataki. Taken through the window of my car that I was driving on that day. And these are women who are collecting water late in the evening in the displaced camp in a town called Goma. And many hundreds of thousands of displaced have fled to Goma, and they have built huge displaced camps in this area, and that causes a big problem with cholera in the rainy season, and many hundreds of people die